Now we're looking at an inferior view of a real human skull. We've got anterior over this left-hand side, posterior over this right-hand side. In the middle, foramen magnum. So this great big hole in the occipital bone for the spinal cord to come through is nice and easy to spot. Just anterior to that and on either side, we have occipital condyles. Now this is where C1 articulates with the skull. Then just anterior to that, from this point of view, you can see a round opening. Now that's an opening for the carotid canal. So that's just anterior and lateral to the occipital condyles. And just behind that, so it's actually just in between the carotid canal opening and the occipital condyles, but we have to tilt the skull back a bit to see it. Here is another opening. It's a larger opening and it doesn't have that round shape, it's an irregular shape. That's the jugular foramen. So jugular foramen here, carotid canal is just anterior to it. Then we have the mandibular fossa. Now on this particular specimen, of course, the mandible is in place, so we just remove it there slightly. See this depression here, that's the mandibular fossa, and you can see that the condyloid process of the mandible fits beautifully into that. Then if we turn this skull over to look at it from a superior point of view, now we're looking down upon the cranial base, and here we can see some other structures. Now if we look towards the anterior part here, so we have the frontal bone here on the anterior surface, just here, right in the midline, if I just tilt it there, you can see there's a raised eminence there. That's the crista galli. Now crista galli, literally translated, means rooster's comb. So the structure that a rooster has on top of its head, that's what that's been named for. So that's part of the ethmoid bone there. Sorry, my finger's in the way. Crista galli, right in the midline. Now either side of the crista galli, notice that there are little holes. Those holes are olfactory foramina. There's lots of them there. So foramina, just the plural of foramen. And then if we move posteriorly over the part of the sphenoid bone here we've got a depression right in the middle of the skull. That's where the pituitary gland sits, and that's called the hypophyseal fossa. So the hypophyseal fossa right there in the middle, but anterior to the foramen magnum, which we can of course also see from this point of view. Then we have either side of the foramen magnum, again from this point of view we can see the jugular foramen. So we saw that before from an inferior point of view, but here it is seen from above, the jugular foramen, and you can see that's a fairly uneven sort of shape, but quite a large opening. Now the carotid canal, remember, was just anterior to the jugular foramen when we looked at them from an inferior point of view. So let's just do that again, and we'll see them from an inferior point of view. But this time, get a couple of coloured chenille stems and put them through these structures. So here we've got in yellow a jugular foramen. If I just gently, making sure not to do any damage, because the real skulls can be quite delicate, if I can just get that to gently go through the jugular foramen, and then if I can get this blue one to go into the carotid canal, which is just anterior to the jugular foramen, hopefully you can see that those two are right next to each other. So where those stems have gone through, they're right next to each other. When we turn the specimen over though, we can see the jugular foramen was the one that had the yellow chenille stem poking through it. That's where it opens superiorly. The carotid canal, where the blue one is, that's where it opens superiorly. So the carotid canal, so underneath they're right next to each other, but superiorly they're quite a distance apart. So the carotid canal, actually as it goes superiorly, it goes forwards as well. So like my index finger there, it goes up and then it goes anteriorly. Whereas the jugular foramen is pointing posteriorly, so it's pointing towards the back. So they're right next to each other when seen from an inferior point of view they're a reasonable distance apart from a superior point of view, and it's actually quite difficult to see the opening on a lot of bones, on a lot of skulls, to see the opening of the carotid canal. Okay, it takes a bit to actually be able to spot it. It's not as obvious as if it was just a foramen, where you could see right through it easily. And then lastly, if we just turn the skull this way, here we saw the optic canal before when we were looking from an anterior point of view into the orbit, but here it is here from a posterior point of view. So that's the optic canal, and we can just see into the orbit through that opening. So optic canal just there.